welcome everyone to today's discussion. Glad you're joining us this morning. My name is Spencer Grice. I'm a principal at SMBW, or we're a Richmond-based architecture firm. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. A few things to note before we get started. We are taking questions, so you can submit those online, and we will try to get to as many as we can towards the end. We're also recording today's session, and we'll share that back with all the attendees in a couple of days. In addition to that, we'll share some particulars about all the panelists today. So if you want to reach out to them directly after this, if you have follow-up questions or just want to get some more insight from anyone in particular, you're free to do that. So today, we've assembled a diverse group of panelists who can help us make sense of what workplace reentry will look like in the next few months. Also going to talk about what may be coming long-term as we think about this pandemic as one of many to come, or possibly just waves of this to come. We're going to talk about strategies that companies are developing for employees to re-enter the shared workspace in the midst of the unfolding pandemic. The dynamics of this are really myriad, and just to highlight a few that are pertinent to today's discussion is every business is a little different in its culture and the kind of work strategies that people have and the kind of work that they do. But there are some common themes of how we work and how we operate in an office. So we're going to touch on those and try to speak to the common things that we can all do as we re-enter the workplace. We're also going to address the fact that the pandemic, it's a really dynamic environment. What we know about the pandemic, what we know about how it spreads, is changing every day. This makes formulating strategy a little bit difficult. You've got to be nimble. You've got to be flexible because things are going to change on us with what we know. But we know what we know today, and so we're going to strategize based on that. In a broader sense, a lot of what you hear on the news talks about the economic disruption that's going on. But the workplace disruption, I think, is really acute for a lot of people. When you think about whether you work in an office or a hospital or a factory, your workplace defines structure for you, defines identity. The networks of people that you engage with, they're important to us. So that work life, that disruption of work life is really dislocating to a lot of people. So I think, the discussion today is really to think about how we get some of that back of what we've lost. We all understand the economic implications, but I think the dislocation has been hard for a lot of people. So understanding that diversity of workplace, the dynamics of the pandemic was the reason that we picked the panel that we've got today. They represent all aspects of creating, managing, and adapting the workplace, whether it be an office, a hospital, or a hotel. The primary focus will be on changes we see coming in the near term as we regroup. But the natural inclination is always to think long term. What are the structural changes that will come? How will we be different on the backside of this? Internally, we've talked about a good model is kind of 9/11, and what were the lasting changes that come out of that, and what are the things that we have rethought. So with that, let me introduce the panel, kind of run through who they are, and then they're going to have a chance to really speak for a few minutes to their kind of market sector and what they're doing in their world to prepare. So Jenny Johnston is a workplace strategist from Capital One. She's at the forefront of workplace culture, understanding the evolving workplace environment, implementing new strategies at Capital One. As a leader of such a large and diverse organization, she can speak to what she's seeing nationally and internationally in the corporate workspace. Stephen Jayjock is a VP with the Projects and Development Services Group at JLL, covering the Mid-Atlantic region. Stephen specializes in tenant and landlord management on projects from pre-planning through construction. It's managed over 3 million square feet, and so has been engaged with a wide range of program types and company sizes. Tamara is a principal here at SMBW, leads the interior design practice. She works to help clients align their real estate to their company mission and culture. Her client base is very diverse, which gives her a wide view of the challenges and opportunities coming out of this crisis. Chris Durand leads the construction management and business development at DPR Richmond. DPR, obviously a national construction firm. He's been involved in some of those high-profile projects in the region, from data centers to healthcare. They can speak to the changes he sees coming in this construction process, but also talk a little bit about feedback he's getting from clients on construction sites. Lee Harrelson is a principal at CMTA Consulting Engineers and a leader in sustainable strategies for workplace, healthcare, and educational environments. His understanding of indoor environments and what strategies can be implemented through MEP systems to help maintain health will be a key component of returning to the workplace. And last, Kimberly Smith is a Senior Director of Workplace Strategy with Knoll. In that role, she engages with customers to create, define, prioritize workspace goals. Along with her experience in the AD community and corporate real estate, she understands the diverse set of challenges in creating culturally relevant workspace solutions. And this will be relevant as we seek to maintain our office cultures in this new environment. So that's our panel. We're very excited to share ideas with you guys today. And so with that, Ginny, get us started. Talk about what things look like at Capital One and how you guys are approaching reentry.
All right. Well, thanks, Spencer. I appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me to be here today. Capital One is approximately 50,000 associates with a really large corporate footprint in cities across the country and internationally. So from the very beginning, we've really prioritized a focus on health and safety of our associates. And as we look to the return, we're taking a scientific and evidence-based approach. So the medical community was really the first to form a consensus around how to eliminate the virus. And it's really informing our approach. We're learning from best practices from other countries and other companies as they start to dip their toe in the water of coming back. But I think it's important that we understand that this pandemic has affected everyone differently. And so we would really prioritize making sure that our associates can do what they need to do in order to take care of their families. There's been a huge disruption in schools, in daycares, and in mass transit of just coming in and traversing to the workplace. So everyone's in a different place and they feel differently about the virus. Their comfort levels are at different places. So there's a requirement to feel safe when you return, not just apply the minimum and do the minimum. So our CEO announced that we would not open until Labor Day. And our data transformation has really allowed us to move nimbly and support 95% of our associates and our businesses at home within a week's time. The feedback we're getting is that our people and our businesses are well supported, but the goal of making that move was really to provide direction to allow people to make plans, to allow our associates to make those plans for the summer and not fly by a week-by-week model. We want everyone to be able to make those long-term project planning, long-term family planning. So, and allow our associates to support the communities that they live in as the health experts in a health-forward approach. So when we talk about our return, we're planning a slow and steady phased return that is, we're kind of exploring the tactical as well as the associate needs. We're exploring what the office will support and what it won't support on this short-term kind of planning. What does spatial distancing look like? What do we need to include versus not? How far away are we really going to be from each other? What are the disinfecting protocols that we need to apply? What spaces will be open and will be closed? And what does that look like? Is it different day 1, day 2, and day 3. And then, you know, how do we help associates through those changes that will be required so that they feel safe and that Capital One is putting their safety as a priority? So this short-term planning will not be bringing back our full workforce initially. We're exploring how we can deal with that through different strategies to support a percentage-based return, whether that be through a steady group, or returning in shifts. Shifts may look like by day or shifts by week. We're talking to our businesses to really find out what's going to work best for them, the teams, as well as the individuals. And we're trying to figure out who are those individuals and those teams that aren't being supported right now and need to be in the office. Like you said, you know, we are by nature need to be close to one another and need to kind of ideate together. So what are those things that can't be served virtually? What are those types of conversations that aren't meeting that need? We do see virtual collaboration as a must, and will continue to be dispersed workforce during this time. But co-location is really important to us. It allows collaboration and creativity to really drive innovation. So returning to the office is very important. That connection, that face-to-face connection, it builds trust throughout a team. And it's difficult to replicate virtually. So we'll also be looking towards our long-term planning. What needs to change? What has this work from home culture done to shift our strategies? And what are these new health considerations? How are they being applied to our strategies? And what do we need to implement long-term within our workplace strategies? But this is going to take time to define, and we'll be using a multifaceted approach that's really driven by data. We'll research what's out in the industry. What is the industry saying? What are our peers doing? What's best practice? And we'll combine that always with what our associate feedback is, and as well as using data metrics to understand how they're using spaces differently, how are they coming in differently, whether that's you know, through our how they're coming into the office as well as observation. And then we'll pilot any new ideas that we need to through small pilot planning, and really decide what is a lasting impact to our strategies as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. You know, it's that idea of in-person collaboration and creating that bridge and getting back to that, I think is going to be critical for a lot of our businesses. Stephen, you know, you're at the forefront of new projects, project planning, dealing with landlords and potential tenants. Talk about what you're seeing in your world.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. You know, JLL, I'll start by saying, you know, for anyone who's not aware, the JLL is a very large global real estate provider. So not unlike what Ginny had mentioned, you know, we are continually provided with communication and information throughout this pandemic from our Asia Pacific group and you know, all over the place. Because my main focus is the project management and client representation out of our JLL Richmond office for the Mid-Atlantic, I can say that, you know, we're still working and supporting our clients 100% remotely, respecting the stay-at-home order, mainly by utilizing our robust online technology platform and toolboxes for virtual real estate searches, tours, and space planning. But we are also still scheduling and conducting in-person tours and performing quality control meetings on construction projects and other essential face-to-face interactions by respecting the CDC's recommended health guidelines, as you know, wearing masks and providing the 6-foot social distancing. What we're seeing now and what JLL has done in the recent months is we've launched a incredible COVID response reentry toolbox for our clients that utilizes the research and the lessons learned, not just from the surveys and polling for all of our offices around the globe, but also the clients that we're servicing. And we're doing this globally, nationally, regionally, because the more and more that you plan reentry, reaction planning, it's more evident that it's not a one size fits all, and there's not a simple answer. I think one of the things that Ginny really alluded to is monitor and watching, because if you haven't noticed, just in the last month, week by week, we're provided with new information about the virus and new information about the pursuit of a vaccine. And it seems that each week things are changing fairly drastically. So it changes the client's approach as well as our own. So I guess I'll really speak holistically to not just what JLL is doing, because we're utilizing the information that we're provided while following, federal and state guidelines, and for us here in Richmond, also local guidelines. I think we're all aware that Richmond was one that held back from the phase 1 reentry. So we're in a little bit of a unique situation in Virginia. So I think that's important to mention as well. I am currently assisting a number of landlords and tenants with the reentry planning. And as I mentioned, they're not all the same. So I don't have a playbook, but what we do have are a number of questionnaires and surveys that we're able to deploy to various groups to start understanding what their concerns are. And I think Ginny had on some really important concepts, which are that we're really focusing on reactivating the spaces by focusing on a balance of health and safety, which I think is very different than the ways that we've approached design in the past. We've always looked at ADA, compliance, but now the health and safety is at the forefront of design. For me specifically in project management, it's also very important to manage the risk that's involved with the financial implications of making these changes. I think it's very important to note that we are in the middle of a pandemic. And so I think the long-term effects are very hard to forecast. Right now, it's very important to focus on the short-term needs and how to get back into the office. And this focus is a gradual re-entry and should be slow and methodical. This isn't a rush back in, but with the surveys that we're doing around the globe, both internally at JLL and with our clients, it's about an 80% return that folks do want to get back into the office. The shape and form of the office, I think, is yet to be seen for long-term effects. For every user that is thinking that they can be more remote, well, I think maybe there are certain departments that could, but for every one of those users, there's always another business that is going to need more space because maybe they condensed too much, and they're going to need more distancing between to provide a healthier environment. Not just short term. I think this is a trend that we'll see kind of moving forward, that cramming people too close together was maybe a little bit aggressive. But again, that's really yet to be seen how things will change, because the world is actively looking for a vaccine, and when that's available, that's, I think, when we'll start seeing the mid and long-term effects to the shape and form of real estate. From an operational standpoint, this is the biggest control that we have re-entering. It's creating a playbook to re-enter your space. And as I mentioned, that should be slow and gradual. But we also need to think about reaction planning. Everyone wants to talk about getting back in. It's very important to think about that reaction planning, and then the what if. And how this relates to your landlord or your building. And so what I'm doing specifically, reviewing the building rules and regulations that had been set. Most buildings are now publishing their reentry guidelines, so I'm reviewing those on behalf of our clients, understanding fully what the building is providing and what changes are being made, and what we need to do as tenants to further accommodate the occupants within, to provide a safe and healthy environment that people feel comfortable coming back to work in, whether that's a phased reentry, split reentry, or flexible environment. Yeah.
So Tamara, I mean, one of the points you made was, people rethinking the workspace that they have now, and how to make that, adapt that to work with what we know today. And you're very involved in program development and culture. So talk a little bit about what the clients are looking for, kind of feedback you're getting.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. I think Stephen and Ginny have done a really good job outlining the strategy, and if the big picture behind what's motivating people's policies as they're trying to create their reentry protocol. I think I'll try to focus, maybe I'll dig deeper into the tactics and how do you do this. So as we've said, what we know is this is going to happen in phases. We're all living through the first phase right now, and we're really encouraging clients not to, over course correct yet. Don't invest in construction. Look at practical modifications to your existing spaces. Modify furniture. Do things that allow you to meet some of those spatial distancing guidelines, but not to get into demolition and construction yet. I think it's going to take us several months to get some best practices behind us, to let the science and data inform what's working, what's necessary, before we should be thinking about making more permanent changes to our space. And then down the road, of course, we know this is going to change us. It's going to change how people work, what spaces look like, the presence of teleworking. I think it's really fascinating that in March, only 4% of the corporate workforce had access to teleworking. And then instantly that spiked to 34% of the corporate workforce. And so I like to think of it as the world's largest pilot project, and we all had to go through it together, and the bumps and the scrapes and adapting to that. So we know that some companies are really learning and studying how that's working for their business model. And for some, they will continue to have some degree of their staff telework. So all of these things are pointing to the signs that we know in the future that we're going to be rethinking how we use space, how much space is necessary. So right now, what we are encouraging people to do is think about their reentry protocol in terms of three buckets. So there's people, place, and process. And when you think about your people, now is the time to really, as an employer, be mindful and empathetic to anxiety levels. If you haven't already, do a workplace survey to just take the temperature of how people are feeling about coming back to work, some of their concerns. Using this information to inform your specific protocol is helpful. Perception is reality right now. An example I like to give is if you take three children on a cold winter day on a playground, and one of those children's wearing a hoodie. The next child has a hoodie and gloves. The third child has a hoodie, gloves, a hat, and a scarf. Now, scientifically, their temperatures may be the same or very little difference, but the perception is one of those children is warmer, one of them is safer. So I think it's important to remember, Ginny said this, that some of the things you're going to need to do to space are serving a purpose. Others, it's more about the perception of safety and trying to build employee confidence. And then finally, with your people, you've got to teach and model new behavior. This is a brand new way of coming back to work. So it's going to take time for them to learn the new house rules and protocol. So signage is going to be really important. Visual cues to promote and explain the new way we can use our space is going to be critical. So second, when you think about place and all of the changes that are coming, first you want to limit and think about access to your office. and controlling circulation patterns within. We understand that one-way directional traffic is really important to airflow movement. We need to increase sanitization and provide cleaning stations, particularly around those high touch point spaces. Lee's going to talk in a bit about indoor air quality. You also need to apply the spatial distancing guidelines to your office space. So that's everything from doing a workplace assessment and looking at your furniture layout and occupancy counts to make sure that things are distanced properly. And finally, thinking about, temporary restrictions on high touch point spaces, your break rooms, your cafes, things like that. You want to really, in conference rooms, you want to be careful about how quickly you allow people to use those again, because those can become congregation. We've had some clients share that even when they allow the workforce to return, they will delay reopening of conference rooms for some time. And that's just simply to allow the employees time to acclimate before they then move on to meeting together in person again. So virtual working is going to continue, virtual collaborations are going to stay. And then the final lens is thinking about process. What's a day in the life going to be like? Well, first, daily temperature checks, whether that's at home or live in the space, but that's going to be something we have to start tracking and monitoring. Continuing to telework, as we've said, it will be a gradual return of the workforce. So teleworking is here to stay for at least short term. And then with that, continued virtual meetings. If you've not already taken a look at your conference spaces back in the office, make sure that they're equipped for webcams, virtual meetings. Those things are going to really be important technology packages to implement. The last thing I'll close with is, on a personal note, one thing we're seeing that's really interesting is just the generational patterns of response. So, just taking a broad brush approach, our older generations are the ones that seem to really be struggling with teleworking. I think they're craving the office sanctuary, the routine, and the ability to not only interact live with others, but that is perhaps their more comfortable management style and how they engage with their teams. The mid-generations, while we've adapted perhaps to the technology change, this is also the group that's hardest hit in terms of trying to manage children, homeschooling, taking care of aging parents. So there's another layer of life needs that are complicating the ability to work from home. And then our youngest generations, these are the groups that have really seamlessly transitioned to working virtually. They're raised with that backbone of comfort. So that's not a surprise. But what we're hearing is that is the group that's really missing the social community aspect of the office place. So just a reminder that, really you've got to be prepared that there's going to be a wide range of reactions and comfort levels. And that's why you need to take all of this into account as you're building your protocol.
Thank you, Tamara. Chris, excited because construction has felt kind of a pretty durable activity through this, at least in our office. Our projects have continued on. But you're in a little different spot. You've got obviously an office environment, but you've also got a job site environment, and they're very different in how you treat those and think about bringing or continuing those processes. So talk a little bit about your world.
Yeah, so DBR Construction is a top 10 general contractor with 30 offices in 16 states, got 6,500 employees, and 3,000 of those are craft workers. We do about 95% of that work in 5 core markets: healthcare, commercial, higher education, life sciences, and then advanced technology. Because of this broad spectrum of markets and geographies, we really have had to brace for the impact when this situation flared up. A large part of our business is based on the West Coast, and we have a growing presence in the Northeast. So we're really on the front lines when states like California and New York and cities like Seattle and Boston took the precautions that they did so early on. Like many companies, DPR uses data. We track performance metrics, we analyze leading safety indicators, and maybe even develop a more efficient way to install an MRI. But when this broke out, our data scientists really developed a Power BI dashboard that we overlaid on our opportunity pipeline and our project management platforms to understand the impact on this business in real time as guidelines and speculations were changing on a daily basis. So put this in place in short order, allowed us to understand where our risk was, what actions we needed to take, and how those actions were going to affect our people, our partners, and our clients. We were also able to monitor in real time projects that were being accelerated, delayed, postponed, and canceled. And our experience has been the full gamut of those over the past 3 months. While it's evident that creating a safe working environment is the highest priority, the most immediate need was to ensure the health of our trade partners and provide consistency, as their preparation really varied a lot. It was not only to do a pulse check on their health of their staff and employees as it pertained to COVID, and what protocols they would put in place to protect everybody, but also to understand their financial and operational health. Because managing risk is ultimately what our clients pay us to do, so it was imperative that we spent this time requalifying our trade partners. More locally, we have 2 major projects in town: the VCU Children's Hospital project in downtown Richmond and the Facebook data center complex in Eastern Henrico. Fortunately for both projects and our folks, we're able to keep most of our staff engaged and both projects moving along. However, we did have to take a short pause at the Facebook project. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we've done to ramp that site back up. This is probably more typical of what a lot of construction folks have already started to or about to experience. So before COVID broke, we had close to 1,000 people on site at Facebook every day. But very early on, Facebook made the decision to shut down all their construction projects worldwide until they had a plan to address the situation. Almost immediately, Facebook engaged our staff and our trade partner staffs to develop a remobilization plan that would address employee safety, testing and communication protocols, and site logistics. One thing we came to realize real quickly was that we were no longer going to be able to have 1,000 people on site, not at least at the same time, not with the testing protocols and social distancing measures that we were going to need to deploy. One measure that we have decided to take is to start shift work. I think Jenny mentioned that in her talk. Shift work can add a level of complexity since you typically have to have additional management staff, and oftentimes there's specialty equipment and lighting that is needed to accommodate the workers on shift work. The Corps of Engineers studies have also showed that productivity can be impacted during shift work, so those losses also become part of the calculus. With respect to communication and testing, we have developed multi-language job site signs as well as a phone-based app with a questionnaire that people coming on site can take, which has really helped the ingress of people to the site, but it's still a lot more cumbersome than a badge swipe. In addition, we've had to modify and or install additional bathroom, wash station, and break facilities in order to accommodate social distancing requirements, as well as implement additional cleaning and sanitizing procedures to clean areas in between break times, shift changes, and off hours. As many of my fellow panelists have mentioned, this is an environment in flux, and we're continuing to stay abreast of the best means and methods to keep our employees, our trade partners, and customers safe and healthy. We have published a market conditions report that will be available to this group, and soon we will be publishing a paper called Creating Cost Certainties, which is probably another topic that we can spend a whole other session discussing, but I'll take it back to you, Spence.
Thank you, Chris. Lee, I imagine you're a busy person these days, given that your world is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, engineering, and your firm has really been on the forefront of sustainability anyway. But I guess talk to us about where your strategies are for your office, but also what clients are asking from you.
Sure. Yeah, well, you're exactly right. The phone has been ringing quite a bit lately. Thanks for having me on this morning. Appreciate the opportunity to participate. I think really one of the best things that's come out of this, and I always try to look, the glass is half full here, is that we've had a sort of a heightened sense of awareness about health and wellness for building occupants, really. Indoor air quality, obviously a huge piece of that. So that was already a little bit of an industry trend, but I think that's taken a huge leap forward I think really first trying to understand how to react to COVID, you kind of need to know a little bit about the science, and we've all been reading about it and hearing about it on the news, but the CDC and other infectious disease experts have really said that these heavy respiratory droplets is the primary transmission mode. Short range aerosolization, where some of those particles get in the air for a short range. The thing is, indoor air quality is really important because we don't have enough data to rule out longer range airborne transmission. So we have to sort of assume that it's going through the HVAC system and through the air. When you're looking for good, reliable guidance on a topic, you want to go to the experts generally. So ASHRAE is a great tool for us. ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And really what they've been doing is studying airborne infectious diseases for decades through numerous pandemics, and they learned a lot from that. And some of that applies to this one. And really they've determined that it is sufficiently likely that this virus could be transmitted through the air, through HVAC, and that changes to HVAC can help. So I really want to kind of talk about two things. One, what we can do as office occupants to reduce the spread and to sort of ease the concerns about re-entering the workplace, but also what building management can do so that we're all kind of aware of that. I think when you look at the strategies of COVID control, they kind of go to three categories: capturing it, killing it, or diluting it. As office occupants, really wearing a mask is kind of the key thing for source control, capturing it and preventing it from getting in the air in the first place. That simple gesture is hugely, hugely impactful. As far as building management, ASHRAE's published some guidelines on that too, which we've been referring to. And really starting with a good building, a sort of structured building assessment is kind of a key first step. Seems fundamental, but checking for things like humidity and mold and mildew, performing routine HVAC maintenance, checking filters, checking dampers to make sure that they can operate properly, so that we can control outside air and exhaust, sort of getting rid of all the setbacks. But there's a few specific things that they've said that could be major changes for buildings, and it's good to kind of be aware of these. But they've said running HVAC systems 24/7 is recommended now. It's a huge energy penalty, but continually filtering and diluting that air in the building is a good idea. Running a higher percentage of outside air and doing a purge of the building 4 hours prior to occupancy and continuing on with that high percentage of outside air through the day is also recommended. Increasing filtration. We're looking at feasibility of increasing filtration. Normally, we are able to get MERV 13 or 14 filters in. Going up above that, most air handlers won't accommodate without some significant modifications, but those are things we can do. Reviewing air currents in the space as well. We've probably all read about the study where a person in our restaurant was infected, and infected like 60% of people kind of downwind of them between the HVAC and the kitchen hood, where all the air is drawn out of the space. So we've been looking at that, and we've seen some impacts of that on recent well certified projects that we've done, where we've had to do actual air quality testing in the space. I'll mention the kind of kill tactic here. UV has been in the news quite a bit. UV germicidal irradiation has the ability with light to kill the virus. There's also bipolar ionization. We sort of feel like UV is a more proven technology. There's more data behind it. It's used readily. ASHRAE's published papers on it. That is a recognized strategy and easy to implement both in duct systems and in the room. Also humidity control, believe it or not. So if we're controlling the humidity in the space to somewhere between 40 and 60%, it takes those little aerosol particles and prevents them from evaporating and traveling further in the air. It also has an impact, it's believed, on the sort of the strength of the virus. And finally, just the dilution principle, you know, really just bringing in as much outside air as possible. It'd be great if we could do 100%, you know, but most systems won't accommodate that, especially as we get into the summer months. But sort of purging air in the building and diluting what's in the air. I think looking forward, I think you're going to see a higher sort of level of design going into how airflow is supplied to a space. Things like displacement ventilation, where we're putting air in at the breathing zone and it goes up and out and doesn't recirculate in the breathing zone. Those are going to be technologies that people take a harder look at. So those have just been some of the things that kind of have been going on with the conversations with our clients, and it's all been very interesting. No one size fits all solution, but you know, that's I guess a couple components of it.
Well, I mean, I feel like, you know, now all I can hear is our air conditioning in our office and the air blowing on me. So, but it's such a tactile thing to people. I think they recognize the importance of that. So last, Kim, to you. You're obviously in the world of furniture. You know, it is the thing that you're often closest to in the office and that you interact with and touch. It's also the thing that structures our office a lot physically. But you're also in workplace culture and working with clients. So talk a little bit about what's changing and what you're talking to clients about.
Sure. Thanks, Spencer. And thanks to SMBW for pulling together a great panel here this morning. Thrilled to be a part of it. And it keeps reminding me as I sit here about Florence Knoll, one of our founders, who was a female architect in mid-century when new buildings were going up in New York City and elsewhere. And she always had an approach to total design. So I think, you know, to the point of this being a total package experience, that COVID-19 is no different than that. It really needs to be all considerations. So I work in the research and strategy group at Knoll. So yes, we do a lot of considerations, but our approach to research, we had to sort of think of the basics and go back to the listen, share, and apply. So the first part was really to listen, because I don't know about you all, but this is my first pandemic and everyone else's. But it's been a really important part of what's happening. So in order to listen to what's really happening, we pulled together peers, facility managers, architects, designers, to really hear from them what their thoughts were about what's happening, because everyone was in that panic mode in the very beginning, because we never imagined. I mean, if you asked me 12 weeks ago, even if I thought we'd all be sitting behind a Zoom camera every day, all day, I think my answer would be, you're crazy. What could cause that to happen? So we gathered together peer-to-peer roundtable groups, and it just picked up momentum. We started probably the second week of this, picked up momentum, and we heard so much from so many people, and a lot of gratitude to pull people together from all walks of life and different industries to hear from each other what's really happening out there. And then from that, we really took the share part, you know, that was the listen part, and we're still listening because, as we all mentioned, it's changing every day. The share part. So we created some documents that would be resources for our customers, because we really don't want people to contact us with a knee-jerk reaction, because, you know, the first thing people are thinking about are screens, adding screens, adding height, adding things. But we know, although we're not, you know, disease specialist or anything, but we do know that you're not going to block a virus with a screen at any height. Essentially, if someone peeks around there and sneezes, it's all over. So we really feel like there's a lot of factors in this total design experience. We didn't want our customers to make knee-jerk reactions, so we felt the most important thing is to inform them around what we had been hearing and learning from a product perspective. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then applying, you know, the sharing was considerations on returning to a healthy workplace that we created in the research group, guidelines and etiquette. Tamara talked a little bit about signage, the importance of temporary signage. So we have a little bit of that. She also talked about the importance of taking the pulse. We keep asking our customers this very question. You know, they'll come and say, what should we do? Should we add screens? Should we go higher? What's the optimum height on a workstation? There's not an answer. There's just not an exact number or answer about what's going to block the virus from our recommendations. We work with our customers on a very specific basis. So what's interesting though is we'll ask the question of our customers, the same thing all the time. What are the express concerns of your employees? Have you surveyed them? Have you asked the questions around what they're fearing as they come back into the workplace? So that's been a really important part. A checklist on considerations that we published quite some time ago. And then really importantly, product maintenance, care, and cleaning. So we really had to do a document that's a frequently asked questions around cleaning products. You know, I think about it, I'm probably going to show my age here, or maybe I should say experience. But when I was becoming a LEED accredited professional way back when LEED was first coming on board, I don't want to say how many years ago it was, but I remember there being moments of buzzwords. And I feel that right now during this pandemic, that there are these buzzwords that are flying around and people saying, you know, we need this, we need this, we need this. They're really needing to understand what is impactful in their own environments and really understand the nature and materials in order to avoid that sort of what was greenwashing for LEED is now kind of this, you know, Corona crazy, I'm calling it, that everybody is sort of a little nuts around certain materials that are must-haves in their environment. So we're cautioning our clients against knee-jerk reactions and really understanding the whole picture and doing a true evaluation around what is going on. But what's great about it, and we'll get into it in the questions, I'm sure. I'm getting to my top of my 5 minutes because I'm timing myself. I know I'm the last and final, but I just want to say one more thing about the importance of, you know, applying it. We did create some temporary screens because we do think in a phased reentry program, people will look to us to create something that might be more temporary and not go crazy. And one of our clients probably said it best when he said that the importance of, you know, all the work that they've been doing from a strategy perspective to open up and collaborate and bring people together, he doesn't want to have diluted in a 10-week period. So I'll leave with that and open it up for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. I do think, you know, the whole idea of balancing the fear that's out there with the data that we know that we can act on, and then being transparent about what we can solve and what we can't. I think every time we have an event like this, you know, there's always the knee-jerk, the overreaction in a sense, and to create solutions that are not durable or not particularly impactful. But thinking about that, Ginny, you know, Capital One, the scale you guys are, maybe talk just a little bit about some of the common things that when, you know, if you've got a 20-person firm or a 4-person firm that you think are the most impactful that people can do in their space to create a safer environment. And if not everybody comes back, but that some people can come back.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure that, you know, everybody's space is different. So I think when you think about a reentry plan, you need to take into account what supports your company culture and your business. Some businesses are better enabled virtually, and that's the safer way for them to go, and some aren't, and they need to come in. But I think that every company needs to meet their individual associates where they are, and that everybody's going to be in a different place. So I would encourage building flexibility into whatever plan you develop for your companies, because I think you're going to need to support associates at home as well as in the office. And that could look different depending on the makeup of your strategy and what you have in place within your office. You know, we may be turning on a faucet and turning off a faucet over the course of the next couple of months and even the next year as this virus runs its course. And that may look different depending on if your strategy supports open office heavily or if your strategy supports enclosed offices heavily. And I don't think that there is a silver bullet. To Kim's point, like we could be additive with product, and maybe that's what makes some people feel more secure and safe in the environment. But we could also add signage and support at home and develop different strategies. And I think that pulse on your workforce and on your culture and what you as a company support is going to be key to any company as you reopen.
Spencer, if I could add one thing to that about small businesses that keeps coming up. In some of the workplace polling that we're seeing that is happening at companies that are less than 50 people, if you're being kind of generalizing, I think one thing that larger companies like a Capital One do really well is they have documented workplace protocol and standards. So in a small company, small business, SMBW, we're 20 people. So it tends to be far more casual and relaxed, the office kind of protocol and culture. So one concern employees of small businesses are expressing is, will these policies be enforced? Because things are so casual in the small business environment. They're concerned about coming back, and are people really going to hold themselves accountable? Because that's another risk concern. So I think just wanted to share that because that's something on the surveys that we're seeing that consistently is a high concern point for small business employees.
Yeah, we actually considered that, Tamara, as an important point when we were putting together some of our resources. So for an etiquette guideline, like an example of what people do, like a Cap One or larger companies have in place already, and what considerations they're going to have to re-educate the employees around a post-COVID environment, that they're going to have to figure out how to tell them what the new behaviors will be, because we're creatures of habit. You'll walk into your office, you'll walk to your desk, you'll say, oh, it's time to get a cup of coffee. You'll walk to the pantry, and if there's a new circulation path that's one, single direction, that's going to be important to inform people before they enter into the space.
So thinking about that, those are, in a way, some of the soft changes and culture changes as we bring people back in. Lee, maybe you could speak to this, or even Stephen, but almost on the building side, we're a tenant in a building, like most people are. What are landlords doing? What are real changes that they're putting in place? What are they asking for to make tenants feel better coming back into the buildings?
Well, from my perspective, what I've seen is, kind of an immediate attention to making sure HVAC system is running correctly, the cleaning protocols that are going on in the office, and then, the messaging aspect of it. I think several of us today have talked about the messaging aspect, and I feel like that point's really important. Most folks don't really pay attention to MEP systems that are behind walls. That's just not, something that they focus on every day. But it's important to let them know the technology that's been built into that keeps them healthy in this case, because it's directly impacting them. So I think signage is a big thing, going forward. I don't know if you've seen any of that stuff, Steve.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that too? The
Reentry plans that I've seen from various buildings in Richmond include heavy communication in terms of signage, social distancing on floors, access to hand sanitation, policies, and I think we all know now in Virginia the policies in indoor locations, public indoor locations, you're wearing a mask as a mandate. So those are in place. From an HVAC standpoint, I am not seeing or pricing. I've done a few pricing exercises for the UV light sanitation you mentioned. I'm not seeing any action or change at this time. However, I think they're making modifications to not just cleaning the physical space, but also cleaning HVAC equipment, disinfecting coils every 30 days, more rigorous filter changes, and using ASHRAE guidelines to introduce as much outside air as possible to buildings. And those seem to be the most common HVAC changes because, oh, actually, and there's one more, that's raising the humidity level based off CDC's, recommendations. So you should feel it's slightly more humid, but there will be more outside air.
I'm curious, Chris, these are all existing spaces. You're obviously working on projects that are in construction and some of them early on. Are you seeing changes to designs coming out of this pandemic, that people are making different decisions on office layouts or furniture or anything like that?
I think right now it's a little too early to say what those changes are going to be long term. I think most of the changes we're seeing are trying to get people back into space safely and to accommodate social distancing. So right now, don't have any trends that I can talk to long term.
Yeah, I can say that we do have a few projects that are in design, and the answer for the most part is that the same concepts for interior office design are remaining the same. You still have communal kitchens, you still have huddle rooms and collaborative areas, and the one thing that I think that Lee brought up that's really important that I'm very happy to see is that in Richmond on typical interior office, a lot of times HVAC is taken as is, and there's very little done with it, minor modifications. You get your carpet, your paint, and your glass. We're having conversations now. What is above the ceiling? How does it perform? Does this cut the cake, or do we need more? And we're starting to evaluate those systems, which I think is very, very good. But in terms of design, for the most part, the same concepts are being deployed. To utilize the real estate as a business tool. To cultivate community, collaborativeness. All of this lends itself to growth of a business, and it's important.
Yeah, and we have seen some changes to designs as a result of COVID. We have a zero energy office building project that just wrapped up CDs in Richmond, and that owner was very interested in integrating UV lights, touch-free faucets, and really just looking for any other opportunity to be able to market a healthier space for occupants, since it is a spec office. And I am starting to see that trend take root, is just an increased focus on quality of indoor air. So
you'll have a case study on the UV lighting soon.
Yeah, we've put it in a lot of locations. Most have been healthcare, but I think one thing to mention about UV lighting is interesting is that it obviously takes energy to run these lights, and if you want single pass kill, you have a lot of lights in the system. But also it can save energy in a way. It keeps coils clean and improves heat transfer across the coil and reduces pressure drops. So there's some benefits there that might be a way to help sell it if somebody's kind of on the fence.
So those are kind of more structural changes, Kim or Tamara. I'm curious. I know we're in the midst of this and we're trying to solve problems that are in front of us now, but you both are kind of on the forefront of design and culture. Our clients, are you guys thinking about what's next beyond this? Is this an event that we see not as a one-off, but as a recurring event? And what's the strategy long-term that we think how we work?
Well, I mean, I think, even pre-COVID, we were looking at that because how people have been using offices these last few years has shifted. There's data that supports, particularly in larger facilities, that real estate's underutilized. People work remotely, people are out, they're not at their desk all day long. And so I think it's something people were already tracking, and as planners we're looking at. What won't change is the importance of community and culture. And so maybe what will change is how people use the office. If it's not the place you go every day to get your work done, what's likely is it still could be the place you need to come for team meetings, for gatherings. So I think people could utilize their real estate a little differently, but it certainly, it won't work for all businesses for the entirety of their workforce to telework. Another thing where I'm seeing changing is people are thinking about their spend differently. If we were doing a year ago, I think clients were putting heavy investments in furniture. They had a more, we've said it already, I think HVAC, and sometimes even technology, particularly in conference spaces, wasn't as high of a focus. And I'm seeing clients already that are in the midst of lease negotiations or thinking about their office. They're thinking much harder now to make sure that those amenities and resources are well outfitted, even if it means, putting some other things on the back burner. So that's been an interesting, I think, pivot, is how people are prioritizing what matters right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Jim, I'm gonna give you the last word.
oh, thank you. I was going to say what we're seeing, similar is a distributed workforce, whether it's empowering employees to make a decision on where to get their best work done. We definitely see the culture and community. There needing to be a collection space for that, those things to occur. And I feel like people might start to look, like we did in some other financial crisis, at a distributed geography of work. So perhaps satellite offices in locations that might not be cities that are more difficult to get into. So we might see a little bit more of that distributed work model.
Well, with that, we're out of time. I want to thank all the panelists. You guys have been great. It's been a really fun discussion. This is the first webinar for me, and I think, we will likely think about this panel coming back and talking about some of those more long-term planning strategies as we get further into this and get better visibility. I thank everyone for joining today. I encourage you to follow up. We'll send out the webinar recording. We'll send out everyone's particulars, and feel free to follow up with any of the panelists. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, Spence.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your
Take
day.
care.
All right, thanks.